Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We're going to give it another minute because I see participants are joining us. Won't even be a minute. So as you're joining, please be active in the chat, join the community, let us know where you are. And throughout this webinar, please feel free to talk to each other through chat. You can put questions and answers in the Q&A. Seeing a lot of new friends and some members of our community that have been on a lot of our webinars together. Thank you for joining us, everybody. So my name is Mimi Laver. I'm the Director of Legal Representation at the ABA Center on Children and the Law. And I direct the National Alliance for Parent Representation, one of the biggest honors ever. And as many of you know, we were supposed to have a conference last May on interdisciplinary legal representation. But because of the pandemic, of course, that got put on hold, postponed for the future. But since then, we've had a series of webinars on issues related to interdisciplinary legal representation for parents. It has been a great series. You can find the recordings of this series on the ABA Center on Children and the Law website. And this session today on parents and caregivers working together is another one in that series. I am really excited about today's webinar. I think you're going to learn a lot, hear a lot of really interesting information, learn about some new tools, and how to advocate for parents and caregivers. So I just thank you so much for joining us, and really thank you very, very much to all of our speakers. And without further ado, I'm going to share the screen with Bree Colthurst, who is a parent advocate at East Bay Family Defenders. She is one of the co-chairs of our National Alliance Committee that was working on the conference, and she is going to kick us off. So Bree, here we go. And again, speakers, thank you so much. This is going to be wonderful.
Thanks, Mimi. So hello again. I am Bres Story. Everyone calls me Bree. I'm a birth mother who successfully navigated the child well-being system. I'm also the founding senior defense parent advocate with East Bay Family Defenders dependency law firm in Alameda County. Not to mention also, as Mimi stated, the co-chair on the interdisciplinary component. Today, we are here to have a dialogue. We're going to have a dialogue of what's going on today. How can we get children to be with family? How can we get them to stay home? We're going to talk about how to utilize our tools during these transitions, how to better work with parent advocates, how to better work with parents, and how to better work with caregivers. Especially during this pandemic, it can be very, very challenging. But before we get into that, I'd like to share a little of my personal story of when my son Love was in foster care and when I was trying to reunify with him. Love was removed as a newborn and placed in foster care due to me being positive tox at birth. Me having a CFT meeting and it was very emotional for me. First time in a system, didn't know anything what was going on. And for me to be experiencing that was very challenging. I thought going into foster care, instead of having my son go with family, I was going to have a better outcome. It didn't go as planned. I left the meeting and went straight into my recovery program. Once I got the caregiver's information from the child welfare worker, I called. She hung up on me. She told me don't call her house anymore. Call back. She asked me, how did I get her information? The father called. She hung up as well. Fast forward, I was reunified with Love at almost 1 month. Mind you, 3 months had gone by, the caregiver was reaching out to the program to see if I had relapsed. 7 months had gone by. She stopped past the house to see my son. She said she wanted him so bad. His name is Love. He's the love of my life. That experience right there put fire under me. To see someone fighting for my son as much as I was helped me today to reunify. I know I had a purpose. I know she did as well. But that taught me, that helped me, that educated me to become the parent advocate I am today. While in program, I was able to go back to college. I took everything, whatever class it took for me to better understand what is it, the importance of caregivers, the importance of reunification, the importance of families reunifying in this system, who are navigating this system. During the 12 years of me in this advocacy work, I have met some amazing caregivers. I've gone on retreats with them, and it brought a lot of closure to me. You know, we all always say, you know what, they're just out to get our kids, but we don't know the other side of it a lot of times. I get it, parents don't um, always reunify, or a lot of parents don't want their kids, but the whole object of the caregiving system is being there to let them make that decision. I appreciate the work that we all are doing to make these transitions as smooth as possible. Thank you for listening. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Meryl Levine. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. And thank you for sharing that powerful experience that you had. And we will be talking a lot more today. But first, I'd just like to introduce myself and say good morning, wherever you are, or good afternoon, depending where your location is. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm Meryl Levine, a senior associate with the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, and I'm a lead on a number of parent partnership projects that our organization does. I've got many years of experience working with nonprofit organizations, and in that role, I've managed a lot of different kinds of programs related to children and families. I've been involved in managing foster care programs, adoption programs, group homes, childcare, lots of different service areas. But I need to tell you that in that experience, when I was dealing with foster care and I was overseeing visitation between birth and foster parents, the system was very different. This was many years ago, and there was no contact when the child welfare system was working with families, particularly the birth families, and I was working with the foster parents through the nonprofit. There was really no allowable contact between a birth parent and a foster parent. And that really led me to thinking about, we need to do something different with our system. Why was that there was not allowed to be any kind of contact, exactly like what Bree was describing in her example earlier. So over the last 15 years, my focus and my passion has changed dramatically. And I've been involved in terms of working side by side with many, many incredible parents all across the country, and working on local initiatives, state initiatives, and national initiatives around really working to engage parents in programmatic decisions as well as policy decisions that can impact children and families. And so through my initial work with the Alliance, I worked with the Casey Family Programs and the Alliance to develop what we call a birth parent national network. And both Bree and Sharon are both members, active members of that network. And that whole network is all about elevating the voices of parents. And through that network, we have really moved forward and actually moved to the next level, which is building a network of birth and foster parents. So can you imagine that today birth and foster parents are really talking to one another? And this network is one of the networks that helps to promote those kinds of issues. So what we're doing through the work of the birth and foster parent partnership is really helping to elevate the importance of building these connections between birth, foster parents, and other caregivers who are caring for our children while they may temporarily have to be out of their homes with their families. But our goal really is to hopefully help them reunify, just like what was able to happen with Bree. So today we're going to have a conversation about the importance of building birth and foster parent partnerships, and hopefully to support safe and timely reunification of children back with their families. I just wanted to kind of touch base real quickly in terms of terminology. We know that there's various terms used for birth parent or parent, or even foster parent and resource parent. I would say right now in our day, this is evolving and changing over time. And I know that the terminology parent is more preferable today than birth parent, but I wanted to kind of explain that you may hear these terms interchangeably through our discussions today. I do want to say that the way the birth parent terminology came about is when we first developed the Birth Parent National Network, we asked birth parents, what did they want to be called? They came back and said, we want to be called birth parents. And the reason at that time was that foster parents really had a platform in which to be heard. They had associations and groups. Foster youth had a platform where they were being heard by policymakers, but birth parents were not. And we wanted to make sure that that term helped to distinguish and help people understand who these parents really were, that they were not foster parents, they were not adoptive parents, but these were parents who had lived experience with the systems, and they wanted to advocate and better the systems for children and families. So without further ado, I want to encourage you to, as Mimi mentioned earlier on, to share any burning questions you have as we dialogue together with this incredible panel that we have. I'm going to introduce them, and also we will be saving the chat. So for those on the call, if you want to post links, we will be able to send that information back out to you as well. So for the next few minutes, I want to take and introduce you to our fantastic panel, and I'm going to turn it over now to Sharon Sullivan-Off.
Thank you so much, Meryl, for the introduction and also just all of the wonderful information that you just provided. I want to just give a shout out to Bree, particularly for her using the terminology well-being. As we go into this conversation today, we're really talking about building relationships, which is key to one's well-being. So I cannot be more enthusiastic about being a part of this panel. As Meryl said, my name is Sharon Sullivan-Off. I am the Director of Public Policy at Children's Home Society. Prior to that position, I was a social service specialist with the Washington State Office of Public Defense, working with multidisciplinary teams and working towards getting children home to their loving and amazing parents. So I've got a multidisciplinary is very dear to my heart, and I know the fantastic work that occurs with that team. Currently here in Washington State, I am a part of a project that is with the department in Casey. We are working on a statewide convening around the idea of birth parent, foster parents, really trying to generate enthusiasm and support. And then I also work with Meryl on the national work and the birth parent, foster parent relationship. So that's kind of who I am. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Sharonda. My name is Katie Byron. I am a caregiver here in Washington State. I have 4 kids and I co-parent 2 of my kids with their moms and families. I am actually the program manager and the co-founder of a program called the Family Connections Program, which is a program that brings parents and caregivers together in a meeting that's facilitated by those with lived experience, that's facilitated by a caregiver mentor and what's termed a parent ally here in Washington State, because relationships are complicated, human relationships are messy, and then you add in the state and foster care and co-parenting with the state. And it's naive to believe that it doesn't need guidance from those who have been there before. And so this program is really designed to have a positive, supportive meeting, really centered around the child and the family, and with those who have been there. And it's also a program that's available after the meeting, because it's not a one and done. You can't bring two people together, meet, and then say, go forth and everything will be sunshine and rainbows and roses. No, it's complex relationships. And so these mentors are there before, during, and after the meeting to help people build these relationships, navigate these relationships, and continue them, hopefully long after the child welfare system is no longer in the lives of the child and the family.
Thanks, Katie. Yolanda and Anne, would you like to share? Yolanda?
Hello, everyone. My name is Yolanda Houston. I currently work for Community Legal Services in Philadelphia as a parent advocacy attorney. CLS works as a multidisciplinary team. We actually offer parents, a social worker, and a parent advocate. My story is a little bit different. Even as a parent advocate attorney, prior to coming to CLS, I worked in Philadelphia Dependency Court as a child advocate and a parent advocate. But what brought me to it is my experience as a foster parent and a kinship parent. One day I went to court as a kinship parent and I saw the representation that my relative was receiving. And because I felt her representation was inadequate, I requested I asked the judge how to become part of the dependency dependency court, so that way I can provide parents with the advocacy that they deserve. As a prior foster parent, I worked where I was able to develop a relationship with the foster family in which the children were able to see and spend time with their relatives, not just their parent, but their relatives, by attending various activities, because working as a team I felt was important for the child's well-being and their development and growth, as well as ensuring that the children receive what they needed, both through as a foster parent, what I could foster, but also a connection with their parents and their families, because I believe that was important. So working as a parent advocacy attorney in Philadelphia, my goal is not only to look at get reunification, but also making sure that the children and parents are always a part of each other's lives and working to get the children back to their families as quickly as possible.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Van Heisen. I am a family defense attorney here at the Bronx Defenders. I've been here for about 10 years. I got into this work not unlike many of the panelists. I didn't have much exposure to the system, either as a parent affected, a child, a caregiver, any kind, but was exposed to the system and thought, this is messed up. What is happening here? Like, how can this be how this functions? Didn't realize I would stick with it. And here I am, and I'm really happy to be here. I've worked for so many parents, and while there have been some incredible success stories, I think it has been more efforts to, make sure these relationships are stronger. Here in New York, for example, they're supposed to have a parent caregiver meeting, within 72 hours of a child going or leaving the parent's care. Things like that are big steps forward. But I've also seen for so many of the parents that I work for, how difficult these relationships can be. I work in an interdisciplinary team, as many of our panelists either do or have done. And that has been invaluable to me as a lawyer in terms of being able to support the parents that we both work for. I work as part of a team, so we both contribute to the case. That has been incredibly helpful. I will also say, as someone who is a white woman, and as Mimi said, this is part of a series of webinars that are being done, given obviously COVID has made these now we cannot meet in the wonderful city of Denver, which I do love. But as a white woman, I'm very conscious of the fact, and have become more conscious over time of the role that white supremacy plays. I practice here in the Bronx. It's obviously incredibly prevalent here, but I think the national data plays out about the effect that racism and white supremacy have for parents and children in the system. And I think that that's especially important in this conversation. You know, for example, Black children are more likely to enter foster care, less likely to stay with family or people that the parents choose to care for their children temporarily, and less likely to be adopted. So all of these relationships build out of the webinars that we've had about, you know, kind of confronting this, confronting racism in the system. And that's something that I'm trying to be more conscious of, obviously, in my own work too. And I'm very happy to be here with all of the panelists.
Thank you, Anne. I would like for us now to ask our panelists really we're going to move more into an interactive dialogue from this point forward. So people are going to be actually responding to one another as we move forward. But we're going to start out with kind of just talking about why is it so important to help birth and foster parents really build strong and positive relationships, and ask each one of you on the panel, why are you so interested in this kind of work? What's your experience and your wisdom related to these important relationships that you can share with our audience today? And again, we're going to turn back to you, Sharonda, and start with you.
Thanks so much, Meryl. And once again, you know, this is going to be a bold conversation. What we know is building relationships is not really easy. I hope that this will be organic between us. And so as you asked the why, in my earlier introduction, I did not introduce myself as a kinship caregiver. I, of course, have navigated the child welfare system in pursuit of getting my daughter. She was reunified, you know, numerous years ago. And if you would have asked me if I wanted to be a kinship caregiver, the answer would have been absolutely not. Nobody wants to walk into a space and recognize that something is failing inside of their own home. And so, excuse me, about 3 years ago, I got in a call. I had known that my son was girlfriend was pregnant. I knew the type of life they were living. My son was, of course, incredibly scrutinized, and the state decided that my grandson would not go home with him. And at the time, I was a full-time student. I was working full-time, and here was this child. My grandson was born. He was 1.9 pounds at birth. So he spent about 2.5 months in the NICU, and you know, we go through all of the formalities of the department making the decision where the child was to stay, and eventually he was to come with me. Now, first of all, I just want to say that you know, when you are older, such as myself, and you've had some children, you know what the work is, right? Raising children is a lot of work, and so a lot of that immature thinking had been beaten out of me by raising children. And so I knew what I was stepping into, and I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I didn't know if I wanted to care for him permanently. And so as a kinship caregiver, one of the things I think it's so important for folks to know is that, you know, we don't get the opportunity or the chance of decision and sitting in that space, right? The proposition is presented and decisions have to be made immediately. And so as a proposal came to me, I took my grandson, but what I did was I had identified a family to take him because I wasn't going to keep him. And I've learned a lot through this process. My grandson, you know, we're still in child welfare. He's been with me for 3 years. He's absolutely not going anywhere. That's my heart. And I love that baby more than life itself. And as I had identified this family, what's clear to me today is I just needed time. I needed time to process. I needed time to understand. I needed time to, make some decisions. And so as I partnered with, this family who initially had an idea that they wanted to adopt, what happened for us is things just changed. Right? It became apparent to them that I needed to keep him, and it became apparent to them that they were invested in my family. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing that had occurred for us. And so as we start this conversation about why is it's important is that we all need support. We all need the place to be able to recognize what we're being confronted with. We need the space to be able to process so that we're not making decisions based on resentment, but we're making decisions based on choice. And as this family partnered with me, we didn't have a destination. I mean, I think a lot of times we encounter and we start off by wanting to be a certain place. But life has a fantastic way of just unveiling itself. And if you remain open, right, you can be a part of something absolutely beautiful. The other reason why I do this is because, as I said earlier, I'm a birth parent, which means my daughter was in foster care. And my daughter was in foster care for 2.5 years. And as Meryl had, so eloquently described, right, this shift, this you stay over here and not be a part of that person's life, and you stay over here, everybody's in their corner. Now, first of all, I want to say the government should not be a part of regulating relationships. There's something wrong with that. I think that people should be able to be put in a position to make some decisions for themselves. We need to be setting up favorable environments so that, the stage is set to a point where people can do some things that maybe they hadn't necessarily thought. So the second reason why I do this is because for my daughter. My daughter has questions, and because of the relationships that weren't built, she can't ever get those answers. And it's really unfortunate. At one point, I tried to rectify that relationship. And because of the stigma that the family had held for me for a substantial amount of times, it just couldn't be erected. And that's really unfortunate. And the last reason why I do this is that in my time of working with parents in direct service, what I can tell you is I know the benefit of having people in your life that are supportive, that are walking with you. We have this system that is so geared to getting children from one place to the other. It removes the opportunity to learn, grow, and heal with one another. That family that I talked to you about earlier, I've been able to be something of a support and a love, and I've brought things to their home as they've brought to mine. And so the families that I've encountered, what I can tell you is they also need that support. And foster families do too. We don't have to have a system put in place where we're separating families or that people are caring for families for a certain amount of years and then all of a sudden everything is severed. The opportunity that stands before us is we can build a better society, better relationships by building and learning and growing and being with each other on this journey called life. There is no destination. And the more people that you encounter that you can embrace and love, the stronger we are as people. So that's the reasons why I do this. I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Wow. Thank you, Sharonda. That was incredibly powerful. So I came into this world 14 years ago when my husband and I got licensed as foster parents, and we got licensed because we wanted to adopt a baby. So we went through the caregiver core training. At that time, it was called Pride. And what I retained from that, and again, it was 14 years ago, was even that training setting us up to be adversarial, because I remember them talking about parents, you need to ask parent permission before you cut the child's hair. And it wasn't presented in such a way as you are caring for someone else's child. So of course you need to ask before you make major appearance changes. It was really like, yeah, they retain this right. And yeah, so you have to ask them. And so it just kind of set this adversarial stage up for me. And I kind of understood a little bit about why openness was important and how children benefit when everyone they love and who loves them is involved in their life, but there was no like how to do it or anything like that. And so I kind of just maintained this fear. It really was fear of working with parents and just couldn't engage. I didn't know how. And so fear kept me from doing anything. And then eventually I met my daughter's mom. She was a domestic infant adoption. And I met her mom and like had this moment where I'm like, this is not really us versus them. Like we're the same. And she was just dealt a very different hand in the deck of cards of life. And it kind of was this moment where I was like, wow, all my preconceived notions of this being so scary, this isn't scary. This is just new. So over the years, I built a relationship with her. I built a relationship with my child's siblings, and it wasn't, I mean, it's a relationship. So there's ups and downs and all sorts of things. But we decided to become foster parents again about 7 years ago. And I came in and we got licensed, and I was like, I want to help put families back together, because I have now spent a lot of time with this mom and seeing what happens when families are torn apart by the child welfare system. And so I just said, you know, we're not looking to adopt. We want to help reunify. And so give us the families who need help reunifying. And I was surprised. This seemed like a novel concept to people that I wanted to meet. We had a little baby boy placed with us, his mom, that I felt like she needed to be seeing him on a regular basis because her baby was removed from her care. And I guess I was really confused from a human perspective. I'm like, I just don't understand why the system is driving us apart. And so it wasn't encouraged. It wasn't like specifically discouraged, but we just built a relationship ourselves, his mom and I, his extended family. And we just kind of figured this out on our own. And I remember thinking, like, we know that it's better for kids to have all the important adults in their lives, but why is there no how? You can't just say, yes, it's better without some tools, or how, or has anyone ever figured this out before? Because I felt like I was trying to figure this out by myself. And then I was watching what happened with other caregivers and parents, and these adversarial relationships would get set up where it was almost fighting over a child, and someone would win and someone would lose. And I was watching everyone come out of it with additional trauma. And that was really hard to watch. I'm like, even the caregivers who are coming and they're being told you can foster adopt this child when the child is a week old. Well, they're in that belief. And so then when the child ends up going home and mom does well, like Sharonda might have had that same experience. The caregiver has had such a different mindset that they can't be a support to that family because it's been adversarial for so long. And so I just really watched this. I became a trainer for caregivers, and I would watch them come in, and I would kind of have them excited about building relationships, and I'd get them on board. And then within a year, the system had no support for that. And the child would reunify and they would leave the system furious and angry and with trauma. And so I knew what happened when parents and caregivers had a relationship, a good relationship, a working relationship. I had seen what happened. I saw the kids go home and still call me auntie and come over. And I remember this wee little guy that I had for his first 9 months of life came to visit me when he was 3. And he was like, Auntie Katie, where did I sleep when I lived with you? And I was like, oh, you slept right here. And I just thought the power of him not having that gap in his story, for him to be able to come here and figure out, oh, I slept right here. And oh, that's my picture on the wall, completing his story instead of like just severing that connection. And so that's what really, I spent a lot of time saying, like, why are we not supporting this? Why are we not doing this? And eventually I was like, okay, fine. So I started creating some trainings, and then out of that grew the Family Connections program, because I said, similar to Sharonda, like, human relationships need to be guided with others who have been there. And so I was like, I need to take Katie of 13 years ago and hurry her along, because 13 years is quite a long journey. And so I was like, what would have helped me is having a caregiver call me and say, look, I know this is scary. I know you're stepping way out of your comfort zone, but there's a lot of power to meeting this parent and understanding that you're caring for this person's child. and that this is a partner and this is not a battle over hair, but you're caring for someone else's child until they can get their child back. And if the child can't go back, maybe it's a new extended family that can form. And so that's kind of what brought me to this work. That's what, that's why I'm sitting here today, because I wish someone had been there so that it didn't take me so long to get here and live in fear when it could have been very different.
I'm thinking about, Katie, when you were just talking about the completing of the story, right? Like each person wants to know where they come from, you know, a child wanting to look back at those pictures, right? I mean, all of that is just so natural and appropriate. And for us to kind of remove that natural sequence is unnatural. I'm thinking about from Yolanda, I had an opportunity, and interestingly enough, as a kinship caregiver, you don't really hear your story very much because we've got this setup where it is kinships have taken their children. You guys got it from here. The way that things are set up, there's really, talk about the person who gets the least amount of supports. And I have to tell you what, I had a powerful experience about a week and a half ago because Yolanda was sharing her story, and it was the first time I had heard mine. And it shuddered my soul to hear that my experience wasn't isolated, because I think kinship caregivers at some point feel like they're on an island. I think about the grief, the grief of a child not taking care of the child, for myself, the guilt that I felt that I had played a part. Parents have anger. So imagine when you're caring for your child's child, right? That anger is just leveled at you. And then caring for the child themselves. And so, the lack of supports to kinship caregivers and our inability to recognize that they too need supports. Had I not essentially went out and said, this is what I need, I can honestly tell you, I don't think I'd be able to do what I'm doing. Like the relationship that I formalized with that foster parent stabilized me, and she carried me, and she still does today. I needed that level of support. So Yolanda, can you just speak a little bit about our kindred experiences? Because I was taken I was swept away by your experience, and that someone else knew what was going on for me too.
Yeah, I would say my experience as an attorney and as a kinship foster parent, and also currently adoptive parent, I understood the role that I played within the lives of the children as well as the families, because what people don't understand is that the way the system is set up, parents and caregivers aren't considered allies. They don't understand that the role that they play within each other's lives is important. I have currently, I have what I call a grandson now, but it was through a relationship. I actually fostered a friend, or kinship a friend. And what I learned was being in that child's life has allowed me to ensure that she's involved in with all her siblings and her siblings and her nephew. She gets to actually a 5-year-old who actually gets to see her nephew on a daily basis because of that relationship that I had with her. I was able to speak with the mother where when the child returned back to her mother, we actually worked together in mentoring her, and which is in ensuring that she received the things she needed. And also just what happens is in the system is that as attorneys, and the way the system is set up, we just believe what the workers are saying. And what I learned was that the way they set the system up, they don't set us up to work together, but to be apart. And what I've learned was if we work as allies, as an attorney, and as well as a foster parent, by working as allies, we can build relationships that will foster success within those families, within their children, within the relationships. When I work in the courthouse, I actually talk to both the parent as well as the kinship parent, because I had the opportunity of working as a child advocate and a parent advocate, and I understood the roles and the needs, the way people could actually understand communicating what the needs of the child is. And actually now what I find myself doing as a parent advocate, because that's what I do exclusively, is trying to ensure that caregivers and parents build a relationship where the children can have additional visitation than what they traditionally offer, because that's essential to the growth of the child, and also allows the children to be able to, even whether they return home or stay or be adopted, still have that relationship. And that's what I not only advocate for, but that's what I live on the everyday life.
Yolanda, one of the questions that came up in the question and answer section is a question about often caregivers report behavior problems when the children visit with their birth parents, sometimes causing the child to be moved more often. In other words, there's issues that develop after that visitation. Are you able to talk a little bit about that in terms of what you see related to that?
Also, the children do develop behavior problems because that's a trauma. A lot of people don't realize every time a child visits their parents and then are taken from their home, they're being traumatized again. So the removal is all over again. And that's why it's important to build that relationship with the child's parent, so that way that child is not just visiting that parent at that one visit. Usually visitations, depending on what your situation is 1 hour a week. So if you have a child that was raised by their parents and then separated instantaneously and placed in foster care, and then you're only telling that child they only deserve to see their parents once a week for 1 hour and then bring them back home, you're going to create behavior, because that's, once again, taking that child and removing them from them. But when you build a relationship with that caregiver, when the caregiver builds a relationship with their parent, that child knows that even if I'm going to leave you, I won't physically be here with you. I will see you again. And that way it decreases the trauma, because all they offer, what happens is because of these behaviors, all these children are now receiving traumatic therapy or trauma therapy, when all they really need is communication, conversation, and more additional visitation with their parents. That's why, like, when I had my children, the older children, I would actually find out from their grandparents, okay, they can't be around their parents, but I'm the supervisor. I'm supervising, I'm ensuring if I can go into the community, I can go to families' birthday parties and things like that, because they realize they're still connected to their families. And that's an important part of their well-being and their development, and knowing who they are and where they come from.
Can I flip the script on that real quick, Meryl? That question?
Sure.
My mom and dad live in another state. When they come to visit and then they leave, my children cry. My children have a hard time. It's a rough couple of days. That's not because seeing my parents is bad. It's because they love them and it's hard when they leave. And so I think framing parent-child family time in the same way is very helpful.
And I'm just going to throw one other piece in there. I think this is a great point about why we're asking for building of relationships. I think the more that people have an allyship and that they're working towards the same destination, that they don't have an interpretation that bolsters their position. And so the more that we are working towards the building of relationships, we're removing that back and forth, because what we're letting the children know is, we're working to getting you to this destination, but you're losing nothing. And the way to communicate, if a child is having a bad day or just an emotional response, building those relationships opens up that communication, those calls, those comfort calls, the way to just kind of diffuse the interaction so that the children know that people are working together. There is powerful action in knowing you've got a team. And I think that the more that we build the relationships, that we remind the children there's a team here working for you, working for your mama. And that shifts things for people. There's a safety and security knowing that people are working together.
I think one of the things I also want to point out is there's been a lot of discussion about like emotions involved. I know Katie spoke about the process and her thoughts about what the parent was like, or how kids respond to emotions. And I think it's important for all of us, especially those who are representing parents, but really anyone who's working here, is that parents, sorry, my lights go off. Parents have incredible emotions about these systems, about what's happening too. And unlike the caregivers who do have a choice to enter the system, right? The parents do not, and often don't have a choice. Typically, I would say in the vast majority of cases, in whether their children are with them, while there are some cases where a parent is like, no, this is the best choice for me. Most don't get that to have their choice, which is to have their children be with them. And then they often don't necessarily get their first choice in caregiver if their children can't be with them. And I think one of the things when we think about this relationship and what it can look like moving forward, I have seen examples of amazing relationships that can form, but often it is the power, frankly, in a lot of these relationships rests with the temporary caregiver as opposed to the parent, who the parent can make outreaches. I have a lot of clients who do that. Like Bree talked about, they'll call the foster home and say, I want to speak to my child, or can my child speak to me? And think of how much stronger, better that would be for the child to be able to have this contact in terms of, the child maybe having these, acting out after having contact with a parent, like having more consistent contact. But often parents get rebuffed. And I think the emotions that parents have, there's like very little control for them. And it's important to recognize that the onus here might begin at least with the caregiving, the resource who's stepping in to play this role, because the parent may not be emotionally able to do that. Or even if they do want this relationship and are thinking of this relationship, they have very little control in actually making it happen, given what's, as Katie described, the sort of training or the antagonistic nature that's set up from the beginning.
So Anne, I think what you raise is the fact that we really do need to begin looking at a culture shift. And I think we're beginning to do that, but we're certainly not as far along as we would like to be. But one of the biggest pieces that we can begin to think about is even recruiting of foster parents or resource parents, that they be recruited with the idea that they know right away up front, they're being asked to work with the birth family in order to help them reunify. And I think sometimes that's been a misnomer in terms of messaging when we've done recruitment of foster parents, and they've really gone in for, like what you were talking about, Katie, for different kinds of reasons in the beginning, and not really having a clear understanding of the fact that there's a family here that wants to go back to their children, and their circumstances may have prevented it right now, but it could happen later on down the road. And I do want to just put a plug for the tools that we will talk about later on. Really do give some hands-on strategies in terms of how parents and foster parents or resource parents can really work together to really help not create that adversarial type of environment for the child, where the child has to pick and choose between the two parents. And also the idea of keeping those relationships going after the children go back home. That's also really critical. And there's nothing wrong with a parent aligning with a resource parent to talk with a social worker about increasing visitation. So all of those kinds of pieces can be put in place if there's a team approach like what you were talking about, Sharonda.
Hey, Meryl, I want to challenge something though that you just said there, particularly around the recruitment piece, right? That bought in, right? We want to recruit people that are bought in. I think an effort really around educating people, informing them, giving them the opportunities to connect and see the possibilities. I think the narrative that is told in child welfare, and I think a large percentage of families that come into are these parents are horrible people, right? Like, you got to save the children. And if you're not bought in, right, but you've got kind of this system put in place or this structure put in place to inform and to educate so that you can shift the way that you've seen your position, your opportunity, how you came into this, right? When we come into this idea of we're going to save children, what happens when we shift of I get to support a family, right? Like, how amazing is that? And so I think the work that stands before us is actually creating those pathways so that when people do come in, that they're getting a new set of information, a new way of seeing the families that they're coming into, and a new place so that they can be impactful. I think that the more that we recognize, when I came into child welfare, I was 38 with about a 15-year-old soul, right? And that nurture and care that the people that changed my life talk to that 15-year-old kid, right? They nurtured that kid to a woman. And we have the power to do that for all people that we come into. When I watched my daughter, what I would do is I'd almost push her in. I push her in before me because the scared little girl inside of me couldn't really trust the world. And so my daughter actually was the conduit. I got to watch people love on her. And then I came out, right? The little girl inside of me came out and it was like, well, maybe it's safe. So I think that there's some opportunities here that we can actually capitalize on, because most of the families that are coming into care have their own trauma, have their own lack of trust, their own disconnect of community and relationships. And we have these opportunities with each other. The greatest resource is human resource. And it's not that you come in with the right mind, it's that you come in with the willingness and that your mind can be changed. That's the power of the people. That's the power of building those relationships. So I just implore us to look at the opportunities to create those pathways, to bring those voices, to bring those stories, to start to dispel the myth that people are horrible. They have a story behind them. We need to be able and willing to hear those stories, because when you hear those stories, you then have that human connection. And most of us, once we connect to each other, want to be of help, want to be of service, want to be of love. So it's not that you have to recruit with that just thing, right? That objective right in front of us. I think that there's opportunities in a multitude of ways. Katie's story is about coming in it from one way, the foster families position that they came in into a one way, right? I just want to adopt. We'll connect with this grandmama. We're going to remain in her life in this way. Everything shifted. Everything changed, right? The only requirement was to show up with an intention. And even when people come in with an ill intention, right, there's still an intention of good in it, right? We just have to shift the way that they see themselves, because it's far more expansive. We isolate our power, right? We don't see that it's expansive, and you can do far more than just this child, right? You can change generations by the way you come in and support this family.
So well said, Sharonda. Thank you for challenging me. I appreciate that. That was great. I did want to take a little bit of an opportunity here to talk a little bit about how the interdisciplinary legal representation team fits into all of this and get some feedback. What's the role of the attorneys and other members of the interdisciplinary team in supporting all of these relationships? And kind of open it up for that kind of discussion as well.
So I'm going to jump on this real quick, Meryl. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about how do you create relationships when the caregivers are scared of their safety or scared of the parents, or the parents have mental health concerns, or a wide variety of reasons why it's frightening to build these relationships. And I think this is where the team can really come around and help navigate that. So maybe someone's challenges make it so exchanging phone numbers is not a great idea. So maybe can we exchange letters? Can the caregiver write a letter and just let the parent know, here's who's taking care of your child and you are valued, and just kind of building that relationship. You have to be creative, and you have to use the support of the team to figure out what's going to work in each situation, because you can't just put a blanket exchange phone numbers on day one, everything's going to go great for every single person. No, but it's a team coming together. And how can we build this relationship between these two? And it's really also examining safety. I think we need to examine safety. Is safety fear, or is there a true safety concern? And even in significant safety concerns, sometimes a letter exchanged through the department can still allow some building of a relationship, pictures going to the parent. But I think a lot of times we couch safety, everybody's unsafe. And I think we need to dig deeper. And is there a true safety concern, or are we scared?
Thank you, Katie. Good points that you're making.
As someone who I work in an interdisciplinary team with the parents, and I think there's a lot of ways that you can try and be helpful here towards improving this relationship. Obviously, for myself, my philosophy is like, if that's what the parent wants, right? And some parents, sometimes your role as the attorney is to, and I noticed this in a chat, someone from Colorado saying, foster parents are essentially intervening at the start of the case and positioning yourself. Sometimes your job as an attorney and the advocates is to act as a shield, either to stop that intervention, to limit that intervention, whether you can through the litigation in the case, or if you're lucky enough to have a policy, some sort of policy groups. I know that there are definitely policy teams in other jurisdictions. I'm most familiar with New York, but trying to push the policies to change those things in terms of stopping that, to act as a shield for your client, because as everyone here has acknowledged, these relationships won't always go well. And you might be in Bre's situation where the caregiver is coming by your house as the parent, 7 months later. Those things can happen. I would say, as someone who has worked with parents, but has no experience myself with mental illness, either personally or in a close situation, I have learned so much from my clients. And in fact, now as a parent, the client who I am closest to is someone who is pretty severely mentally ill. And she has taught me so much about what it means to be a parent, what it means to know yourself, know your children, know how you react in the world. Even though sometimes she does things that are confusing to me as someone who's experiencing a different reality than she is. I think that I will put that out there, just because you assume someone is scary, like Katie said, doesn't mean that they are. And in fact, I think most parents are actually scared of the resource parents because they're taking something that's so precious from them. But I also think that you can, if you are a parent's attorney, having a team, for whatever reason, people don't always like to talk to lawyers. I don't know why. Sometimes we get a bad rap. But if you have someone who's not a lawyer on your team, you can often make more headway in terms of having someone reach out. If the foster resource is like, I absolutely want no contact, speaking to the agency, your local social services agency, to say, can we move this kid? You as the lawyer can file motions to try and move the kid, obviously to get to where your client, their parent, wants that child to be. A parent's choice is so important here. And especially when the caregiver is someone they don't know, like that choice is stripped from them, which is incredibly powerless feeling. But you can do things, as a sword and a shield. And I think having a team when you're working with a parent can be incredibly helpful in either working with the resource, or if the resource won't work with you, trying to work with the agency to force the resource to work with your client, or perhaps changing the resource, or, even maybe as an initial measure, or as a last ditch measure, explaining to the judge what's going on here. Even if the judge won't move the child, they say they've been with this resource for a long time, at least the judge can get a more accurate picture of how the resource may be sabotaging or not the family. And those are important things that you as the lawyer can bring out to the judge, either, in order to get the child with the resource or not. And I think that those are all things that we, especially as someone who works with parents and in an interdisciplinary team, you can use everyone on that team to play a different role to get what the parent you're working for wants, but also hopefully to assist in mediating that relationship, because unfortunately the relationships often need to be mediated, at least initially, given the nature that they come with.
So Anne, I just wanted to add a little bit more in terms of the relationship building. And I think it's great when you have a team. I do think, though, that it's really important that there is a person that really takes the time to listen to the parent and hear what they have to say, because many of the times when I've listened to the parents that I work with, they basically say back, well, I just needed somebody to hear what I had to say and believe in me. And it was that one person that did do that made the difference to help them overcome some of the challenges related to substance abuse or other kinds of issues that were going on. A lot of times they really find themselves in circumstances out of fear, out of pain. And it's really a person that is willing to listen that, to me, will make a big difference. And a team approach is an even better way to get that kind of sense of parent feeling as though the team really wants to hear what the parent has to say. So I feel like that's a really important relationship building. You have to build that trust, or we're not going to be able to move forward. So
that's true. I would say I know within community legal services, we not only is it that person have a attorney, they have a social worker and a parent peer educator. Therefore, they have the comfortability of knowing that they can speak with their parent peer because they've been through what they've been through. Yes, that some people can speak to their attorneys comfortably, which is what I try to do. But when I can't help that person, they have a parent peer or person to speak with. And they also have social workers. Everyone's talking about mental health. A lot of people with mental health are hushed and they're not heard, but they actually have valid points. They know their children, they love their children. And when they try to communicate to foster parents, workers about the needs of their children because of their mental health issues, some people dismiss them, and they actually know better than most of us would think. And I think it's important that we understand their voice and know the validity associated with it, because for even though we may say that their parenting is not appropriate, for the years leading up to the child coming into the system, that parent was there and they were dealing with those behaviors and the needs of their child. So therefore their voice is essential. Whether you say their mental health needs make them a safety risk, they actually have knowledge. And I believe that representing parents, that is my duty to ensure that these parents' voices are heard, that kinship is always looked for, found. I actually try to, like within it, try to figure out who the resources are. Parents sometimes say they don't have resources, but always there's a friend. And I always tell them it doesn't have to be a relative. It can be a friend, someone you trust, because guess what? They actually know that child as well. And that parent is actually able to communicate with them. And they also, as an ally, as a resource person, they're able to communicate with the team as well, because they feel as though that you were an active part in keeping their family together, whether it's as a birth parent or as a kinship parent or a family friend. They feel as though that you're part of actively keeping that family together, and therefore they're willing to communicate with whether it's the social worker, the parent peer, or the attorney.
I just want to collaborate on something. I forgot who had spoke on it, but while navigating the system, I have seizures. So that was trying to be used against me. So what I brought to their attention, like, I dare you, I raised 2 older sons. And now you want to say because of me being epileptic that it had a problem with me raising my little son. And so I had to jump through hoops. I had to get papers from the doctor. I had to go to DMV, get a printout in order for them not to use this against me. So if you don't know, if you don't have the skill, determination, and the footwork, if you haven't done the footwork, it can turn on you. They can't use it against you if you don't know your rights. And just to point on with Katie, in Alameda County, we have, and someone else asked it in the chat, we have, it's called chats. It's communicating history and transition. It's a parent advocate with the bio parent and the caregiver, where we're sitting down having a meeting at one of our county buildings. Because I'm on the legal side now, I don't do them, but I was queen of chats, because this is so powerful where you're holding a meeting, you're building a bridge in order for them to get their own little communication started. And again, caregivers hear all this about us, We're judged, stereotyped. They hear, don't come in with tattoos. They're really intimidated because what they've read in the reports. Then we have the parents. We already know once the child is with the caregiver, they get the upper hand. And so we're fighting, we're intimidated, we're scared to move in front of them. So with these chat meetings, I'm building the bridge. I'm letting them do their own transition. They're asking questions, what your child needs to sleep with? What kind of food does he eat? The parent is asking, who's in your home? Well, they're exchanging this information, and it's so powerful because I step back after that and either they build it or some don't say, you know what, it was good. No, thank you. We've never had any disputes or anything. We always let them know they're in a safe environment at the agency building. We have a deputy downstairs to make sure that caregiver is comfortable. And we give them the choice to make what time and where to set it up. And they're very successful. They're very, very successful. And I just wanted to share that part. Thank you.
Thanks, Bree. Hey, I just wanted to chime in, particularly on the multidisciplinary team approach and the power that's actually in that team. What's interesting about a court, right, is it's adversarial. It's set up to be adversarial. And I think about the layout, right? You've got kind of the CASA in the middle, you've got the social worker over here, you've got the department or the defense over here. And what I look for is, how do I form allyship? Because a lot of times in those setups, right, if the parent can be on a lone island with their attorney, I mean, it's just, they're out there all by themselves. But the more that you can pull in allies, it's actually strategic, right? It's a strategy to start to build and formalize those relationships. It strengthens your position and it weakens the other opposition's position. Because when you have a foster parent that's buddied up with the department, then that position is strengthened. We want to start to reduce all of that. And so there's a strategic nature to this also. The other thing I just want to point out is that I know we can be extremely prescriptive in the way that we approach that. And I'm not an attorney. I'm a feely, handsy type of gal, and it's just kind of what works for me. And I'm not dismissive of the prescriptive nature of it. This is relationships. These are people with lives, right? These are children. And I think that we can get into the arena and it can be dismissive that you are talking about people's lives, their loves, their children. And the more that we, as an attorney, I think about myself and that, my attorney was my guide. You don't combat hate with hate, you combat it with love. That's just basic info, right? So if I come in with a notion that you actually want my child, and then my attorney confirms that, right? We haven't really leveled anything. We're just building up these walls. We want to start to pull those walls down so that something absolutely amazing can happen. So it's not necessarily that you have to give a position, but you don't have to be adversarial in what you give to people. And you can give them permission to actually be open to the notion of changing their mind of how they see the players in their case. And the more that you can promote that, the more that you're actually securing your position of strengthening the defense's position. So I think that there's a strategic angle to it too. I think the more that we just create a space for things to happen without, that culture shift we're talking about are those corners, right? Parents are this, you're that. When we confirm that, we're not changing anything. And when you're talking about a well-being system, these are the pieces of how you actually get there, right? So you are a part of that well-being notion of how we're creating the path to get there. So we want to challenge the beliefs, because when you challenge the beliefs, that's when people change. They're married to those beliefs, right? We have to help them to see that you still don't have to lose your position, that actually in the building relationship strengthens it. So it's a strategic angle for those wonderful lawyer minds out there, because I know there's lots of those.
So Sharonda, I'm thinking that this is probably a good time to introduce the tools and let people see what we're talking about. We have 2 hot off the press tools that we have released, and it is really through the Birth and Foster Parent Network that has been created. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to kind of make sure that people do know what these tools are all about. We're certainly hearing from all of you, and thank you all for sharing how these relationships are so critical to support the well-being of children and their families. And so I just want to go through real quickly with everyone so that if you want to access these tools and begin to use them, we wanted to kind of introduce them to you and let you have a better understanding of what they're all about. But first, I just wanted you to meet the members of the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership. This is a unique group that was formed in 2016 to help move this culture shift. And they really were formed in 2016 to create a national movement where it would be birth parents, foster parents or resource parents, kinship caregivers, and also staff, also focusing on ways to improve the relationships and build these connections that we've been talking about over the last hour or so. But the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership itself was formed in 2016 by 3 different organizations, which include the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, the Youth Law Center Quality Parenting Initiative, as well as, and really important, Casey Family Programs. And it was really through our efforts as organizations, we included a few birth parents and foster parents to really brainstorm how could we begin to take a look at building connections between these 2 groups, because for so long they've been separated, or even issues like what everybody has been raising on this call about being fearful of birth parents. It was when we came together as a group, I have to say to you, and this was before COVID, we were able to meet a couple of times face to face as a group. This is birth parents and foster parents. We weren't sure what was going to happen. It was the most incredible experience that you can imagine. And Bree was a part of it. Sharonda was a part of it. Katie's been a part of it. And it really was an opportunity where birth parents and foster parents were really talking to one another. And it may have been the first time that a resource parent really saw a birth parent in a different kind of light, some of the different issues that they were dealing with. So I say this all to you because I'm hoping that with these new tools that we introduce, you will take them back into your own communities and encourage people to take a look at introducing different kinds of practices and the ways that we can promote the importance of building these kinds of relationships. Oh, I went the wrong way. There are basically 2 major tools. One is a relationship building guide, and that one is really more a hands-on type of guide with tips about how birth and resource parents can actually work together and do different kinds of strategies, like the idea of a parent really feeling comfortable talking to their foster parent or the resource parent and asking them, how many children do you currently take care of in your home? Beginning to ask those the parent has the right to know where their child is staying and having a better understanding of what that home is going to be like for their child. And so these are kinds of tools. It also is a way for the resource parent to really get some ideas around what they could do in order to support the parent in connecting with their child and building those relationships. We've also got a state and local leaders guide, and that one is more a tool that is targeted for the administrators, child welfare administrators and staff, because you need to have the policies and practices. We can go out there and promote all of these ideas about building relationships, but if we don't have the systems to support these kinds of efforts, then we're not going to be able to move this movement forward. And then we did create an executive summary that kind of summarizes in a short, brief kind of way both of these different tools. And with that, I'm going to take us over to Sharonda and Katie, who are going to talk a little bit about the relationship building guide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Meryl. And as Katie had mentioned earlier, right, that roadmap, how do we actually get there? It's a great idea. It makes a lot of sense, but where do we go from here? And so the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership Relation Guide is a bit of that roadmap. But just as you're going in any destination, right? I mean, the fun part is the detours or the beautiful things you see on the way. So this is not designed to just be one way. It's just it's a tool. Once again, I can't reiterate enough that, you know, if we create the environment, fantastic things happen for people. Katie's actually going to walk you through a couple of the components of the tools, just kind of tell you a little bit what's inside the guide. Katie?
Thank you, Sharonda. So I think one thing that's important to point out about these tools is we had some different questions in that people were like, how do I get caregivers on board, or how do I introduce this idea? Well, this tool is a great way. It's free. It's easily accessible at the website. Print it off and hand it to them. And maybe it'll just plant that seed. And the beautiful thing about this tool is that it's not a prescriptive, you must do this, then this, then this. It's a ton of ideas. So it meets people where they're at. If this is the first time a caregiver has ever been kind of open to being open about meeting a parent, there's tips in there for that parent. If you've got a caregiver who is an old hat at this and just wants to figure out if there's some other things they can do, there's tips in here for that. And so the guide really is accessible to everybody, anybody who is even open to being open, or even maybe those who aren't open. Maybe it's a Katie of 13 years ago who is harboring this deep inside her head that she might be open, but on the outside doesn't look like she is. Hand her this guide, let her read it. Read some of the quotes in here. There's quotes in here from parents. There's quotes in here from caregivers, people who have done the work, walked the walk. And so, as I said earlier, this is not just a meet once and go forth and everyone be merry. And so this guide really helps. So there's the section on building the relationship, supporting it, keeping it strong while supporting reunification and working with the system. Because remember, I said you have the component also that you are co-parenting with the state. So that makes it a little more complex. And then how to keep the relationship strong after the family leaves the system. And so in an ideal world, you start at the very beginning building this relationship, because I think one thing to challenge is that you should start building this relationship when the child goes home, because now you've got some amount of time, 2-3 years of an adversarial relationship, and now the child's going home, and it's tough. It is really tough to build a positive, supportive relationship at the end of 3 adversarial years. So if you can get in early, get people working together early, get that sense of team, then it's a whole lot easier to keep that relationship going at the end. And so that is, so this guide is really intended for parents, caregivers. Agencies can absolutely use this and distribute it to their caregivers, anyone they're working with. I think it's a good tool for anyone supervising family time visitation. So it's just really kind of planting those seeds, doing those little ripples, getting it going, and then going on from there.
So, and I would just add on to that, Katie, is that you can use this tool. The child welfare system can introduce this kind of a tool to their workers to help them see these are different kinds of ways that the birth and the foster parent partners that can partner together. And it's also a good tool for training. If you're bringing in new resource parents, it's a great tool to introduce the new resource parents to in terms of how to build the relationships and move them forward. So these are great. And also for parent partners who are working with families, this is a great tool. It's a great discussion guide. You can just kind of pick a topic and talk about it back and forth as a tool, that kind of way. But I do want to share with you the other tool that we do have, and it's a really great tool as well. It's the State and Local Leaders Guide to building strong policy, building a strong policy and a practice foundation. And this tool really is a guide that is focused on sharing lessons learned, providing strategies that'll facilitate strong birth and foster parent partnerships, it reflects feedback that has been gathered from parents, resource parents, in terms of what strategies work best. I was hearing earlier on around the idea of a phone call within the first 24 to 48 hours between a birth and a foster parent. And that's a lot of times that's called a comfort call. And a lot of the states, there's some states that are now legislating using the comfort call as a beginning connection. I think in Minnesota is where they may have just recently introduced it. And I think they're looking at it in the state of Florida. But this tool is actually broken up into 5 different areas, and it touches on how do you create this culture change? What are the conditions that you have to put in place in order to create the culture change? And then there are really quotes, just like what we had in the relationship building guide. This one also has lots of quotes, and also promising practices and policies and implementation tips. So with that, the intended audience, I think that I had kind of shared with you earlier on, even though you can certainly take this kind of tool to the birth parents and the resource parents and kinship caregivers, it's also really helpful for child welfare workers, parent partners, court advocates. So it's really a wealth of information, and we hope that you will take a look at it. The last thing that I would just kind of highlight for you, both of these tools really come from the framework of children and youth will thrive when all of the important adults in their lives are able to build these kinds of strong relationships. And we're able to support these relationships through policies and practices. So it's critical, just in terms of all of, if you are going to go back and you're going to take a look at implementing these kinds of strategies, that you need to have the buy-in from the leadership of your organizations so that they will support you in terms of having in terms of building these kinds of important relationships. But I would say to you, no matter what you do, these tools really were developed in partnership with parents, resource parents, staff, and we hope that they will continue to be the key individuals that are involved in terms of the development and the refining of these tools over time, and that we can learn from one another. I would appreciate if you want to share in the chat, how do you plan on supporting relationships between parents and caregivers after hearing all of our discussion here today? We would love it if you would share those kinds of comments or thoughts that you might have in terms of any ideas, or we'd love to be able to get those ideas, and we may want to include some of them in on our tools as we continue to refine them over time. And then the very last slide is just a link to the different resource, the websites where people can access information about the tools and these kinds of building of relationships. So I would like to kind of open it back up to the group. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there's other thoughts, comments.
My ending comment is be bold. What I saw in a lot of the chat was some of the challenges. This is difficult for people to take in, the notion that we would change a system that would actually benefit people in a profound different way. So be brave in your pursuit of how you will incorporate this information, how you will ask for this information. We've done some fantastic things here in Washington State. Part of our efforts are actually bringing in birth parents to foster parent trainings. We come in, we share our stories to humanize the perspective of what people think parents are. So be innovative on how to kind of infiltrate and come into the experience and the need for building relationships, not just for children, but for each other. Foster parents, I think, deserve to a certain extent, and I don't know if deserve is the right word, but certainly I think the humane response is particularly when you love on a child and coming from that space of wellness, that we want to just continue those ties. Children really are cared for well in a larger percentage of these homes, and having as many people love on your child as possible is never a bad thing. So whatever we can do to kind of promote that is exactly what we're all about.
Thanks, Yolanda. Anybody else want to add any other thoughts? Well, we could open this up and Mimi, I'm going to turn it back to you to see if we want to respond to any questions. We have about 5 minutes left. So I didn't know whether you want to, I don't know how easy it is to open it up to questions though with this larger group.
Well, there are a few questions in the Q&A. Meryl, I think we've really hit on most of them. But there's one that I think we talked about a little bit, but someone would love to hear about experiences maintaining connection after reunification, that their department frowns on that. And Katie, you mentioned it a little bit. And I don't know, Meryl, if that part of the relationship building is included in the tools or if anyone has comments about that question.
There is a section on that in the tools, definitely. There is an actual handout. The relationship building guide really has kind of one-pagers for each one of those 4 topic areas. And one of them is strategies and ideas of ways to actually interact between the birth and the resource family after the child goes home. But Katie, I don't know if you want to add any more thoughts to that.
I think I'm just going to stress building the relationship early, because I try to help caregivers imagine if there's been an adversarial relationship, all interactions have been either negative or neutral at best, and that it's setting up that win-lose dynamic. And then it becomes obvious that the child's going to go home and the parent has only known you as someone who's been critical of them or has not supported them or not been interested in getting to know them. Try to imagine, why would that parent want you to stay in their life as soon as they're done with the system? And contrast that with someone who's kind of been there and been your cheerleader and been like, hey, you know what, you can do this. You can do this. And a lot of times that's my role as a caregiver, is I am the one that if the parent's open to it, can give a hug. And I can't tell you, when I often take kids to the first time they see their parents after removal, over and over. It's scary, it's uncomfortable. But most of the time, I don't need to be scared for my safety. I need to be prepared with Kleenex, because I can't tell you how many times the parent has broken down when I've offered them a hug or said, here's your baby, because I'm the first person who can really respond in that way if the parent's comfortable. And so you got to start early. You can't be on opposite teams until the end and then say, hey, include me. Because why would I include you if you've been critical of me for this whole time and that you don't support this child coming home with me? So it's just really figuring out how to build even a working partnership. You don't have to be best friends. I try to tell people to kind of think about it as your in-laws. Like, these are people you may not choose if you had the choice of life who to hang out with, but because you both love the same person, you gotta figure it out. And so that's kind of how I try to frame it, is like, yeah, you may not seek this friendship, but you love the same person, so you gotta figure out how to make it work. And sometimes Thanksgiving's gonna be a little awkward, but you make it work. Because you would never ask your spouse to choose me or choose your parents. We wouldn't do that. And so I think we kind of need to reframe some of this in child welfare. Like, okay, yeah, we don't ask people to choose. So
the other thing we really want to stress is that we want to look for strengths in the parent. I think a lot of times we're always with that perception from a negative idea, and we really want to, and the tools really help in terms of looking at what are the strengths that the parent brings to the table right in the very beginning, because that'll help in terms of building the relationships as well. So we hope that you'll all take a look at the tools, and we appreciate all of the wonderful chat that's been going on here throughout this whole webinar. We so appreciate all of those comments. And I think you did say, Mimi, that we would be able to copy the chat and send that back out after today's webinar to people.
We could, but I think what I'm leaning towards is sending out the PowerPoint and the link towards of the tools and a recording of the presentation. And all of that will also, I hope, be posted on the ABA website in addition to the BPNM website. So as long as Meryl's okay with that, that will happen. So all of you, thank you so much for your presentation, for sharing, for ending on the up note of love and power and community. And thank you all. And thank you all for participating in this webinar, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you
guys. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was good.